Hey, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. You're listening to the longest running superhero role playing game on Earth. As always, I'm your host, the Game Master. And today we're going to be talking about the Superman family, Mixia Spitlick, bat-mite, all sorts of stuff. Before we get into that, though, remember to smash that like button. Check to see if you're still subscribed because YouTube loves to unsubscribe people. Ring the bell so you know when I upload new stuff. And as always, leave us a comment because that really helps us out on our end. We've got a great community here, and it's all thanks to you guys. Thank you so much for being here. With all that said, let's dive in. So, the prologue to this one started in 1949, which is 10 years before the main thing for this game session. And in 1949, what happened was Lex Luthor and the Joker kidnapped Lois Kent. So by then she's married and she was pregnant with two kids. One is Clark Kent Jr. and the other is Joel Kent. At any rate, so the villain's plan is that they have this laboratory where Lex Luthor has figured out how to replicate kryptonite in a lab. And not just green kryptonite, which they do have, but also gold kryptonite, which for anyone unfamiliar will remove Superman's powers forever. So they have two safes, and there's one safe contains green kryptonite, the other one contains gold kryptonite. To make a long story short, the heroes save the day. The safes are melted so that the lead encases the kryptonite safely without anybody being exposed to it. And Lex Luthor and the Joker are arrested by Abin Sur, who is the current, in 1949, that is, Green Lantern of Sector 2814. So, shortly after that, we find out that, well, first of all, Lois has the kids, right? And they are a handful. They are honestly more than she can deal with. Okay. So we bring in the idea of the Superboy robots, which they appeared in Superboy comics after 1949. But since that was supposed to be a sort of like a period piece of when Superman was growing up, we then therefore assume that in 1949 these things exist. And for anybody unfamiliar with those, the idea is uh, kind of a pre-crisis idea. They've gotten away with it, I think, after the crisis. But the yellow sun radiation doesn't just make a Kryptonian stronger, it also makes them smarter. And Superman also has access to knowledge on Krypton, which had a way higher tech level than Earth, right? So as a result, even as Superboy, he was able to build robots that were so incredibly lifelike. I always think of them kind of like a Terminator in a way, but they have the powers of Superman. You know what I mean? So they're so lifelike, you can't tell them apart. And so something people bring up a lot is, well, why would people not know that Clark Kent and Superman are the same guy? Because part of the time, whether it's back when he was Superboy or whether it's when he's an adult as Superman, he'll get one of these robots to stand in either as Clark or Superman. And so seeing them side by side is kind of what makes people assume they're two separate people then, right? And the general public, to the best of my knowledge, is completely unaware that there are Superman robots. Okay, so all that said, the robots help with babysitting. That's the idea, that even though Lois can't really keep up with her kids, even though they're half human, so they're only half as strong as their dad, basically, right? Um, it's still more than a human being can keep up with, right? Which is very frustrating for her. So The robots are kind of taking care of the kids. Lois recovers, loses the weight, all the usual stuff, after a pregnancy. And one day she is passing by this bar down on the docks that, in my mind, I like to think that one day this is going to be Bibbo's bar, if you know who Bibbo is. Um, just not yet, right? Because at this point, it's probably the year 1950. So, well, no, it'd be 1951. And either way, right? She's down at the waterfront. She's walking by a bar because at this point she's still working for the Daily Planet. Um, and at any rate, she overhears some bad guys talking about how Lex Luthor owned this company. And it was kind of like the precursor to LexCorp. And I'm trying to remember the name of it. It had a weird name like Standard Electronic Products, something like that. Where it sounded very boring. Um, and so after Luthor was taken to the planet Oa, his henchmen and stuff like that are kind of talking about like, well, he left all this super science behind, right? So like, what do we do with all this stuff? And one of the things that Luthor had been working on is this machine that can basically turn a human into a Kryptonian. And so, but the idea is it runs on something called Vivanium, and it's kind of a one and done thing, right? Once you use the machine, you've used up this rare material and you can't do it another time. And so these stupid thugs have decided they're going to auction it off, and that they're kind of putting the word out through the underworld that whoever the highest bidder is, they will take them to the machine. This person will have the powers of Superman, not necessarily the weaknesses of Superman, mind you, as is so often the case. But then, the idea is this person's going to be really hard to deal with, and they're going to try to take over the world, and so on and so forth. So Lois can't call on Superman for help because at the time, the government actually has Superman digging, uh, like hollowing out mountains for them to have secret bases in, um, which has kind of in recent years become sort of its own thing. But in this comic book that I'm basing it on, they give Superman this thing that's kind of like a giant drill bit kind of a thing with like bicycle handlebars, sort of, and then he like spins around at super speed and like flies into a mountain, and he's making tunnels under the ground and all sorts of stuff for the government. So since he's busy doing that, he can't help Lois, and Lois doesn't have the evidence she needs to take this to the cops. So she decides to handle it herself, which is classic Lois, right? And so she goes down to the Hall of Records and she figures out what company was in Luthor's name and so on and so forth. She goes to the company with some phony schematics, and she claims that she represents a company of some sort that needs this machine built. They want to contract uh, Luthor's old company to build this supposed machine, and she gives the schematics to the guy, and when he's looking at it, it doesn't quite make sense to him because it's not like legit stuff, right? So he goes to talk to somebody else to see if this other person understands what it is that she wants. And so he leaves the lobby and he sort of goes off to the left. But off to the right is this heavy metal door that says no admittance. So of course, that's the door Lois goes through, and then in this huge room is this machine. And if there's any confusion about this, basically, this is the precursor in the comics to what we saw in, I think it was Superman 2, where Clark gave up his powers to be with her. He basically was turned into a human, right? But then at the end of the movie, he reverses that, and assumedly, you now are left with a machine that turns humans into Kryptonians. So that's what this is. But the whole thing is very diesel punk. And it takes up the entire room. So she goes in here and she finds this panel with these big levers, and she's like, what does this lever do? And she pulls it, and you know those plasma globes that have like the little pink lightning bolts in them and stuff, and you touch it and it comes to your finger? It's kind of like she's inside of one of those. So the pink lightning, which was pink lightning in this comic book issue, strikes Lois. And interestingly enough, it doesn't bother her. I don't know if the idea is she's like instantly invulnerable and therefore feels no pain, but she doesn't know any change has happened. And the machine uses up that rare element that powers it. And so then the machine powers down. And so she's not sure what to make of this. She decides she should go get somebody who knows more about electronics than she does. So she's going to go back to the Daily Planet to talk to a contact of hers. And when she goes, well, first of all, she goes to open that big metal door and she rips it off of its hinges. Because she not only does she have Kryptonian powers, what you have to understand is this is her first day of having Kryptonian powers. So she's actually dangerous, right? So she like rips this huge metal door off its hinges and seems a little confused by it, but isn't really cluing in yet. She goes outside where there is a public trolley system in Metropolis back then, kind of like what we saw in Roger Rabbit, right? So she goes to run to catch up to this trolley, and she does. I mean, she gets there too fast because now she has super speed. Um, and like when she goes to grab a bar to pull herself up onto the platform, she stops the trolley. And so the trolley driver is mad at her and stuff, and she's starting to figure it out. Um, so she excuses herself, and when she's sort of in the middle of nowhere, she starts to fly intentionally. You know, she suspects she has the power, she tries to fly, she does. She's incredibly bad at it. So we get kind of this greatest American hero style montage of her crashing into brick walls, and there's a sign on top of a bank that she bumps into and she knocks this sign over. Um and so at any rate, she goes back to where Luthor's henchmen are and all that, and as Superwoman. And she basically wears a Supergirl outfit. Um, she defeats them and takes them to jail. She gets the evidence she needs, so there's an arrest and all that. And then using her super speed and all that, um she takes this huge machine apart, because she doesn't want it to fall into anybody else's hands. Even if it's out of this element that it needs to work, she just doesn't want, this to be a thing. So since she's married to Superman, she knows about the Fortress of Solitude. She knows where the Fortress of Solitude is, all that. She takes that stuff there. And then that's where her kids are right now, kind of in daycare with the Superman robots, you know what I mean? She puts the machine back together again, and so on and so forth. But in our game world then, we keep her as Superwoman. And the reason I do that is because I feel like um so many people want to play one of Superman's kids. And the reason for that is sort of everybody likes his powers, but with my players, everybody kind of has a different personality in mind that they want to play out, and it's pretty much never Superman's personality. So they feel like the kids are a little more malleable and they can grow up, because usually we just saw the kids as little kids. So we never saw what they were like as adults. So then the idea was in a more modern setting, my players were playing these various kids after they grew up. Um, and most of them were a little more in terms of personality, I'd compare them to somebody like Spider-Man, where, they have their foibles, they're only human, if you pardon the pun. Um, but at any rate, so because of that, because the players want to play Superman's kids, then we have a lot of Superman's kids, and there have been a lot in various stories over the years. So we just say Lois had all those kids. Um, and then I feel like her being Superwoman helps with that, right? Because part of it is she's not going to get old now. It's not going to be hard on her body, like in real life. Um, you know how it works, probably, right? I don't need to go into it, but it can be hard on a person's body. The more kids you have, the harder it is. Um, So, if her invulnerability would handle that, the kids aren't made of magic or kryptonite or anything like that. So therefore, it doesn't hurt her to have kids. I'm not even so sure after this year, point in time, which is I think 1951. After that, I don't even think she would experience pain in childbirth because of how the Kryptonian invulnerability worked in the pre-crisis era. At any rate, so all of that is the prologue. So then we get into the main body of the game. So then 10 years after the Joker and Luthor kidnapped her when she was pregnant, again, Lois is pregnant. And now it's 1959. She's pregnant with twins named Larry and Carol, who I did not invent. They're in the comics. And interestingly enough, they appear several times. I was kind of surprised. I don't know why, but I honestly think they appear more than any other kids in the pre-crisis era. They were reoccurring characters. If you guys want to know issues or whatever, I can give you issues and stuff in the comment section. At any rate, um, so yeah, so she's pregnant with Larry and Carol, and this time there's all sorts of crazy stuff happening in the background because what's happened is there's another galaxy where there are aliens whose civilization is basically going to be destroyed. And their only hope is they have this kind of weird transporter system where they can basically only transport the mass of one, human-sized character, like a 6 foot tall, 200 pound, whatever person, um, back to where they come from. And whoever that person is has to be able to save their world, right? And so when they go to Earth, they decide that the world's finest, which was the phrase everybody used back then in 1959, the world's finest were Batman and Superman. And so the aliens have this conversation about, well, who's the better hero? Who's actually more capable of saving us? And bat-mite, for those who are unfamiliar, he's a imp from the fifth dimension, just like Mr. Mxyzptlk is. Bat-mite appears and says that it's Batman. Batman is the greatest hero in the world, and Batman can do anything with enough prep time. And so, yes, he can absolutely save your planet or galaxy or whatever it is that you need. Well, so this irritates Mxyzptlk, who then appears, and it has been, by the way, been 90 days since we last saw him. Basically, once a season, he will show up. So you can get 4 Mxyzptlk adventures a year, every year. Point being, he shows up and basically tells Batmite that he's off his rocker, that clearly Superman is is the better choice because of all his superpowers and stuff. And he's kind of like, what is Batman going to do to a black hole? Like throw a batarang at it? Like get out of here. And then, Bat-mite argues with him and he gets up in his face and is fighting with him, and he's like, no, Batman would have an omni gadget that would do something, and blah 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 blah. He'd find a way. And then Batman at this point, at the end of the 1950s, Batman's had all sorts of crazy adventures by now where he keeps the gear of the guys he defeats, right? So for instance, after Batman encounters somebody like, I don't know, Mr. Freeze, he keeps that freeze ray in the Batcave. So he's like, Batman's actually fought aliens and stuff from other worlds. So he's got all sorts of gear by now. So at any rate, they fight, and the aliens are sort of like, look, we're kind of on the clock here, like our civilization's ready to end. We don't have a lot of time. What's the answer? And so the conclusion all these characters arrive at is let's have a contest to see who is better. But the thing is, if Bat-mite tests Batman, then the concern is that he will go easy on him so that Batman wins or seems better or whatever. So they decide to trade dance partners, so to speak. So Bat-mite goes after Superman, and he is setting out to prove that Superman is the inferior hero. Mxyzptlk goes and screws with Batman, with every intention of killing him, by the way, to prove that Superman was the better hero. And so what follows is just insane. We get Superman um, is exposed to red kryptonite, and he turns into like a giant Frankenstein kaiju version of Superman, until the red kryptonite wears off. Superman, by the way, had some help from his pal Jimmy Olsen, who is, of course, fully grown by now in 1959, and he's been promoted at the Daily Planet and so on and so forth. Um, Meanwhile, Mxyzptlk is making buildings come to life in Gotham City, and they're running around the town. Batman, who at this point is still Bruce Wayne, by the way, is getting old enough that he's not a spring chicken anymore. And this is kind of hard. And he's like getting in construction equipment that's like a crane with a big wrecking ball and taking out the leg of, one of these buildings, so on and so forth. And it is just absolute madness. And we ran this. This was based loosely on a issue of Batman Superman Generations, which I mentioned in an earlier video. I met John Byrne, and the irony is it in turn is based loosely, I think, on my game, um, which is another story. But point being, we played it out, and it was just insanity. It was just an entire game worth of insanity. And so finally, as everything sort of reaches its climax, the aliens bring it all to a stop, and they say, we've seen enough. And so Bat-mite and Mxyzptlk go to the aliens, and they're like, cool, Um, and Bat-mite is like, so it was Batman, right? Batman is the most powerful, the biggest threat, this the end all be all. He is Bat God, he can do anything. And the aliens are like, no. And Mxyzptlk laughs and he goes, "Ha, I told you so. It was Superman, He can he can drag an entire galaxy behind him on a chain. He can do this, he can do that, he can fly so fast he can just go through time at will, he can do anything. Obviously, it's Superman." And the aliens are like, "No." And Mxyzptlk and Bat-mite are like, "We don't get it then. Who's the most powerful of all?" And the aliens are like, "You are. You guys are." And so they abduct him And remember earlier how I said the transporter can only handle like one 6-foot person? Well, it can handle 2, 3 feet tall people. You know what I mean? That weigh 100 pounds or less or whatever it is. So they take them back to their world. And after this, we really don't see bat-mite or Mixius pitlick again. So that's a pretty fitting ending to the 1950s, in my opinion. And the epilogue to this is Lois gives birth and handles it really well. Because, like I said, invulnerability means no birth pain. She recovers really fast. At this point, I don't even think Lois eats food anymore. I think she just flies out into space and soaks up sunlight, and that's it. You know what I mean? She has solar sustenance. So her weight isn't an issue. She's kind of eternally young. Um, Stuff like that. She's living no longer works at the Daily Planet, by the way, because people are going to notice that she's the wrong age and stuff like that. Sometimes when she and Clark go to Metropolis for something, they can use makeup and stuff like to make themselves look old. But they kind of avoid it as much as possible. Um, so they're on the Kent farm in the absolute middle of nowhere. And then I feel like that's the best place for super powered children because the kids do stuff like, um, and I'll include this in the epilogue. There's a point where Larry and Carol fly through the wall of the farmhouse. And so Lois is over there patching it up, you know, at super speed and all that. And then Carol melts Larry's toy truck. He has like a old timey Tonka truck made of metal. She melts it to slag using her heat vision. He starts throwing stuff at her. Like he goes to the kitchen and is getting into the dishes and stuff and throwing bowls and stuff at his sister, you know, with Kryptonian strength. And by the way, the first two kids who were born were only like half human or whatever, right? The way we treated it was we treated it as though for just the sake of easy math and because the story doesn't really give us any more information to go on. So we said the machine really does turn Lois into an actual Kryptonian. So we're saying her kid, you know, after that year, then her kids are fully Kryptonian. You know what I mean? Um, so when they grow up, they'll have like a strength of 50 and not a strength of 25 or something. So that said, super babies, which is a thing, because again, the super intelligence means that even super baby, you know, could talk faster than other kids can talk, and you know, all that. But even, you know, as little tykes, these guys are just insanely a handful. They have all the power of a Kryptonian with they don't have any patience. You know what I mean? They're still kids. So we really need Lois to be Superwoman to handle all that. And kudos to her for doing it. She ends up raising, I counted it one day. I can't even remember now how many it is. It's like 22 kids or something, you know? Because again, she's not getting old. So every, you know, whatever, every 5 years or something, she can have some more kids. Um, but yeah, you get the idea. That was this game. I feel like I've rambled on far too long. But that was this game. It was pretty wild. I liked it though. I'm a sucker for the Silver Age. I know a lot of people crap on it. I think the Silver Age is great. Um, we do kind of change some tone stuff a little bit. Um, where I do think there's some benefits for later writing. Like I like the writing in the Bronze Age, but I like the concepts in the Silver Age. And so sometimes we kind of do a blend of that, you know. But I really liked this one. I hope that you enjoyed hearing about it. If so, as always, you know the routine. Hit the like button, make sure you're subscribed, ring the bell, and leave us a comment because that helps us out. From all of us here at the longest running superhero role playing game on earth, we truly hope that you guys have an awesome week. Take care, and we will see you in the next adventure.